This is what remains of the Han Dynasty's Great Wall, standing silent in the deserts of northwestern China today. For more than half a century, since the reign of Emperor Xuan, the only sounds here were the bells of camel caravans and the music of royal wedding processions. But all of that peace vanished, it seems, the moment Wang Mang's new dynasty was born. In the year 9 AD, the empire's northwestern frontier was ablaze. The Xiongnu nomads, who hadn't dared to raid for decades, began launching small, scattered attacks across the border. Their iron hooves shattered the peace of the frontier. Villages were burned to the ground, trade routes were cut off, and people were forced to flee their homes. This wasn't a decisive war like the old days of Emperor Wu. It was a series of low-intensity, high-frequency border conflicts, difficult to prevent and impossible to effectively stop. But what truly baffles historians is what started it all. It wasn't a territorial dispute, it wasn't an economic conflict over trade, it was a small metal seal. The new emperor, Wang Mang, had unilaterally torn up nearly 60 years of diplomatic tradition between the Han and the Xiongnu. In 9 AD, right after taking the throne, he sent envoys to the border, demanding the return of the official seal granted by the old Han court, on the grounds that the dynasty had changed. But when the Xiongnu ambassador received the new seal, he saw the problem immediately. The inscription read, "The stamp of the Xiongnu of the Xin dynasty." This was the stamp of a subordinate, a vassal. The old one had been called the imperial seal of the Xiongnu Chanyu of the Han. A seal was what an emperor used himself or granted to a king. A stamp was for a lower-ranking official. A one-word difference that signaled a world of demotion. The Xiongnu envoy protested on the spot. He furiously declared that this stamp was not what the great Han emperors had given them, and he demanded the return of the old seal, the golden symbol of 60 years of peace and dignity. Faced with this entirely reasonable argument, the Xin envoy, a man named Wang Jun, first tried to bluff his way through with political jargon. The old seal was granted by the Han. He said, "Our new dynasty has received the mandate of heaven. Naturally, all official seals must be renewed." This, of course, convinced no one. With the ceremony at a stalemate and fearing he'd be punished for failing his mission, the envoy showed his true colors. He first threatened his own translator, ordering him to force the Xiongnu to accept the new stamp, or else. Then, in a tense and hurried ceremony, he shoved the new stamp into their hands. But the most humiliating moment came right after the Xiongnu envoys turned to leave. According to the Book of Han, the Xin envoy immediately ordered his men to violently destroy the old seal. They took that golden emblem of 60 years of friendship and smashed it to pieces. It was an irreversible act. In the most brutal way possible, it destroyed any chance for diplomacy and utterly shredded the Xiongnu's honor. When news reached the grasslands, the Xiongnu Chanyu was enraged. He understood instantly. Wang Mang didn't just want to change the relationship, he wanted to treat the Xiongnu as slaves he could order around at will. The mask of peace was ripped away, and the response was the most direct one the people of the steppe knew: war. Yet Wang Mang seemed to dismiss the Xiongnu's low-intensity retaliatory raids. After all, in his entire lifetime, the empire's borders had been secure. 2 years later, the old Chanyu died. His successor, for various reasons, proactively sent a delegation to seek peace. This pleased Wang Mang immensely, but he wasn't about to let them off easy. He demanded the return of 2 traitors who had defected to the Xiongnu. Behind the scenes, his envoys ended up paying a hefty price to buy the traitors back. After all, nobody says no to money. But this purchased peace lasted less than a year. A pro-Xiongnu kingdom in the western regions killed a Xin official. Wang Mang, deflecting his anger onto the Xiongnu, flew into a rage. He announced 3 punitive measures. First, he officially renamed the Xiongnu Chanyu to Xiongnu Fuyu, literally, the surrendered slave who obeys me. This was psychological warfare. Second, he ordered the immediate mobilization of 300,000 troops from across the country to march to the northern border for a 10-pronged invasion. This was his grand strategy. Third, he declared he would break up the Xiongnu nation into 15 separate tribes, each ruled by a grandson of the chieftain who had originally submitted to the Han. This wasn't just a strategy, it was a detailed plan for the aftermath. So two questions arise. First, why would a newly crowned emperor engage in this kind of escalating wolf warrior diplomacy, risking a full-scale border war over a point of pride? And second, could this new dynasty, this beginning of the nation, actually mobilize 300,000 men to march into the steppe and replicate the glory of Emperor Wu? Had Wang Mang's bizarre reforms truly turned his empire into a Confucian ideal, a socialist-like utopia, invincible and radiant?
Hello everyone and welcome back to China Puzzle. I'm ZQ. Last time we told the story of how the entire elite class of the late Han Dynasty collectively summoned the Confucian sage Wang Mang and pushed him step by step onto the dragon throne. Today we look at the second act. How did this utopia, built on textbook theory, collapse so completely in just 15 years? To understand Wang Mang's actions, we have to enter his mind and find the source code for all his policies. It wasn't Karl Marx's Das Kapital or a modern economics textbook. It was this Confucian classic, The Rights of Zhou. This book was believed to be a record of the perfect social structure and government system of the ancient Zhou dynasty. In reality, modern scholars have proven the book's origins are highly suspect. It was almost certainly not written during the ancient Zhou period, but centuries later by scholars from a tiny, declining vassal state. It was an idealized, romanticized fantasy of a lost golden age. The bad news is, it wasn't really written by the great Duke of Zhou. The good news is, at least it wasn't written last week.
But for Wang Mang and his Confucian court, The Rights of Zhou was gospel. His chief advisor, the renowned scholar Liu Xin, was the champion of this text. He would wave it in the face of any doubter and repeat the same mantra. The book says so. The Duke of Zhou did it this way. Frankly, compared to the mystical prophecies and numerology that had been popular before, The Rights of Zhou was a step up. It at least described a comprehensive, systematic, and seemingly rational system of governance. It was logically self-consistent. So for Wang Mang and his bureaucracy of scholars, The Rights of Zhou wasn't a reference book. It was a standard answer key to be copied word for word. His humiliation of the Xiongnu was the inevitable result of this thinking. He was obsessed with Confucius's idea of the rectification of names. He genuinely believed that if you just gave everything in the world its correct, ancient title, then the chaotic real world would automatically become orderly and beautiful. That's why he didn't just demote the Xiongnu Chanyu to a surrendered slave. He renamed the Goguryeo kingdom in the northeast to Lower Goryeo. Internally, he launched a massive campaign to replace all the country's place names and official titles with obscure, archaic terms from the classics. To us, this seems absurd. To Wang Mang and his team, it was the #1 priority of governance.
Wang Mang thought diplomacy was a word game, but a truly mature empire knows that behind diplomacy, there is always the calculation of blood and iron, of cold, hard power. In the very same year, 9 AD, that Wang Mang was forcing his new stamp on his northern neighbors, the invincible Roman Empire was learning that lesson in the most brutal way imaginable.
In the forests of Germania, the Roman governor Varus and his 3 elite legions, the 17th, 18th, and 19th, walked into a meticulously planned ambush in the Teutoburg Forest. After 3 days and nights of slaughter, nearly 20,000 Roman soldiers, along with their commander, were utterly annihilated. The 3 legionary eagles, the sacred symbols of Roman glory, fell into barbarian hands. When the news reached Rome, the elderly Emperor Augustus was plunged into despair. For months, it said, he refused to cut his hair or shave his beard, often banging his head against a door and crying, "Varus, give me back my legions." The man who had forged the Roman Empire's golden age had, at the end of his life, learned the terrible risk of unchecked expansion. For the last 5 years of his reign, Augustus forbade any large-scale retaliation. The empire's strategy shifted from relentless offense to cautious defense. His heirs, Tiberius and Germanicus, commanded massive armies on the border, but their primary mission was to stabilize the shattered frontier and calm their shaken troops. But Rome's restraint was just a holding pattern. The fire of vengeance they had suppressed erupted the moment Augustus died in 14 AD. Just 1 month after the emperor's death, Germanicus led the legions across the Rhine, a blade of vengeance slashing deep into German territory. Over the next 3 years, he fought 3 decisive campaigns. He stormed an enemy tribe and recovered the first lost eagle. He crushed the main German force in a textbook battle on the plains of Edistaviso. Finally, he won another major victory at the Angevarian Wall, shattering their will to resist. Rome had proven, in the bloodiest way possible, that its honor was not to be trifled with. But what happened next is what reveals the strategic genius of a true global power. Just as Germanicus was on the verge of conquering all of Germania, a message arrived from the new emperor, Tiberius. Return to Rome. The war is over. It wasn't that Rome couldn't conquer the territory. It was that after a cold, hard calculation, Rome had chosen not to. They realized that the blood and treasure required to hold that vast, poor forest would be a bottomless pit. It was better to establish the Rhine River as a strong, defensible border for civilization.
Here, Rome demonstrated the complete mature feedback loop of a superpower. Arrogance led to defeat, defeat led to reflection, reflection led to restraint, restraint set the stage for vengeance, and the victory of that vengeance led to a final, rational choice to set a limit. Now let's look back at Wang Mang's new dynasty. His wolf warrior diplomacy wasn't based on a realistic calculation of national strength, but on a worldview from an ancient book. When his verbal diplomacy failed, did he have a military and state machine as sophisticated as Rome's to carry out effective punishment? Did he have the strategic wisdom to face failure and cut his losses? Let's see what the historical records say. First, the 300,000 troops were indeed mobilized, a motley crew of officials, civilians, professional soldiers, junior officers, and convicts who trickled towards the northern border over time. The result? After 2 years, not a single meaningful battle had been fought. The command was chaotic, morale was non-existent. The massive army sat idle in the border provinces, but the generals were incompetent and discipline collapsed. Soldiers died in droves from disease, starvation, and corruption, or simply deserted. It got so bad that the army, lacking supplies, began looting its own border towns for food. Isn't that the ultimate joke? An army meant to conquer the northern steppes couldn't even feed itself on its own doorstep. What happened to the supposed institutional advantage of Wang Mang's state-run economy? What happened to the economic boom from his monopolies? Where was the demographic dividend from the millions of slaves he had supposedly freed? The tide had gone out, and we can see who was swimming naked.
Now we must analyze the economic utopia that Wang Mang and his Confucian team tried to build, also based on the rights of Zhou. In our last episode, we talked about the idealistic goals of his land nationalization and economic controls. But between the ideal and the reality lies a fatal chasm: the people in charge. There's a saying, angels in imagination, devils in the details. If Wang Mang's ideal state was a grand architectural blueprint, then the ones building it were a crew of giants in theory but dwarves in action. Wang Mang surrounded himself with theorists like Kui Fa and Zhang Han. Their greatest skill was digging through Confucian classics and mystical prophecies to find a sacred-sounding justification for every decision Wang Mang made. Whatever he wanted to do, they could prove it was the will of heaven. And who was actually implementing these sacred policies? take his core economic reform. Wang Mang set up 5 equalization offices in major cities to control prices and manage markets. These officials, led by a man named Lu Kuang, were for the most part completely ignorant of real economics. They used their power over pricing and monopolies as a tool to exploit merchants and compete with the common people for profit. The histories record that under their management, farmers and merchants lost their livelihoods, food and goods disappeared, and the people wept in the marketplaces. A government where theorists explain the world and dogmatists try to change it runs the ultimate risk. To protect the purity of their theory, they will ignore the complexity of reality and drive the nation into an abyss.
And even more rigid than his bureaucracy was Wang Mang's own personality. When an idealist holds absolute power, his paranoia becomes the nation's greatest disaster. This was perfectly demonstrated in his currency reforms.
In just over a decade, based on various ancient records, he launched 4 or 5 different currency reforms, issuing 28 different kinds of coins in various shapes and materials. The complex exchange rules and unstable values brought commerce to a standstill and shattered the economy. Yet he remained convinced he was following the sacred laws of the ancient sages.
At this point, we have to make a critical argument. Wang Mang was not a time traveler. He had no idea what socialism was. But even if he had been a time traveler armed with a modern economics textbook, I sincerely doubt he could have avoided this fate. Because any reform is not just a battle of ideas, it's a brutal contest of power. Wang Mang's power didn't come from a violent revolution. It came from the endorsement of a part of the old ruling class, the Confucian scholar officials who controlled the narrative. This means his power base was made up of property owners and vested interests. He had no revolutionary party, no iron-willed cadres who could enforce his will at the grassroots level. All he had was that same bureaucracy of scholars, just as detached from reality as he was. A regime with a weak power structure and abysmal executive capacity is doomed to fail, even if it holds the most advanced theories in the world. And the more systematic and complex its policies are, the more catastrophic the results will be.
If the border war was a persistent rash, the utopian state was about to face a terminal illness. In 11 AD, a massive natural disaster struck. The Yellow River burst its banks in what is now Hebei and Shandong province, triggering an unprecedented change in its course. The floodwaters abandoned their old channel that flowed into the sea near modern-day Tianjin. Like an unbound beast, the river surged southeast, scouring a new path across tens of thousands of square miles of the North China Plain, the empire's core agricultural and population center. Millions of families saw their land, homes, and property washed away in an instant. A natural disaster alone doesn't destroy a dynasty. But it is a brutal stress test. In fact, the Yellow River changed its course 5 more times in Chinese history, but only twice under Wang Mang's Xin dynasty and later the Yuan dynasty did it directly trigger a swift dynastic collapse. I think these 2 dynasties had one thing in common: a penchant for misguided, disruptive policies. Initially, the Xin dynasty, having inherited the vast Han bureaucracy, was not completely idle. Wang Mang ordered granaries opened and food distributed to victims. He even declared he would eat only simple vegetarian meals to show solidarity with the suffering. On paper, the relief effort was happening. But the state machine, already corroded by Wang Mang's chaotic administration, had lost its ability to function. The grain sent to the disaster zones was siphoned off by corrupt officials at every level. The policies of charity turned into opportunities for graft. More importantly, the broken state apparatus was simply no match for the tidal wave of millions of desperate, starving refugees. It was Wang Mang's man-made disaster, his incompetence disaster, that caused the state machine that should have saved lives to grind to a halt. This directly led to the creation of a massive migrant population, providing the million-man army for the rebellions to come.
This raises a question many people have. Didn't Wang Mang nationalize the land and give it to the poor? Didn't he ban the slave trade? Why didn't these policies, which seem so beneficial to the lower classes, stop them from rebelling?
The answer is brutal and simple. Because these reforms, which actually threatened the core interests of the powerful landlord class, were never truly implemented. Faced with fierce, stubborn resistance from local elites and old aristocrats, Wang Mang and his Confucian officials showed astonishing weakness. They had neither the ability nor the courage to take wealth from the true vested interests. After just 2 or 3 years, the much-heralded land reform and ban on slavery were quietly abandoned. There was no showdown, no bloody purge. The elites simply said, "Your Majesty, you can't do this." And Wang Mang replied, "Fine." So what do you do when your reforms hit a wall? Wang Mang and his theorists chose the most pathetic and shameful path. He went after the soft targets. Since he couldn't take from the powerful, he doubled the shackles of exploitation on those least able to resist: the merchants, artisans, and independent farmers. Through his economic controls and chaotic currency, he used the power of the state to frantically compete with his own people for profit. This is the ultimate hypocrisy, the fatal flaw of the entire Confucian utopian experiment. It shouted the ideal of share the wealth, but its actions amounted to robbing the poor to feed the state. Faced with the litmus test of vested interests, its so-called benevolent governance revealed its true nature: powerless against the strong and ruthless against the weak. A state that promised to save the people ended up driving them from their homes. And now, its gravediggers appeared on the stage. At first, they were just sparks. In 14 AD, small bands of bandits and rebels rose up in Shandong and Sichuan. By 16 AD, a local strongman in the northwest united with the Qiang people and briefly captured several towns. In 17 AD, the first true rebel army appeared. A common woman named Mother Lu, seeking revenge for her unjustly executed son, spent her family fortune to raise a militia and storm the county seat. This was the first open rebellion of the era. Soon after, in Shandong, a refugee leader named Fan Chong, needing a way to distinguish his men in the chaos of battle, had them dye their eyebrows red. The Red Eyebrows, an army that would one day shake the empire, was born. Finally, in 22 AD, the tipping point was reached. A rebel army hiding in the green forest mountains of Hubei met and, for the first time, defeated an elite army of the Xin dynasty in open battle. News of the victory spread like wildfire. Across the land, countless people struggling in hunger and despair joined the unstoppable flood. The utopia built by sages and theorists, its cold foundations already soaked with the blood and tears of ordinary people, was about to face its final reckoning. But here, a bizarre and darkly humorous episode took place. In August of 23 AD, Wang Mang's chief advisor, Liu Xin, the same man who had championed the rights of Zhou, committed suicide by taking poison. He had been caught plotting a coup. Seeing that the dynasty was doomed, he had conspired with top generals to overthrow Wang Mang and restore the Han dynasty by putting a Liu clan member on the throne. And which Liu did he plan to install? According to the latest prophecies, the chosen one had to be a man named Liu Xiu.
All right, Bill, so let's get into this. We were talking about the collapse of this ancient Chinese dynasty, and you mentioned the emperor's top advisor, this guy Liu Xin. You said he had a plan.
Oh, a plan. You call that a plan? That's not a plan. That's what happens when you've been sniffing too much incense in the palace basement for 20 years. This is what drives me nuts about these history guys. They're always so polite. Oh, he had a strategic vision. No, he didn't. The guy was a lunatic. The whole damn building was on fire, and this genius comes up with the dumbest idea in human history.
So, what was this genius plan? He's trying to start a coup, right?
Yeah, a coup. So he gets his buddies together, the generals, right? And he's like, gentlemen, the prophecies, these little magic fortune cookies that apparently run the whole country, they all say the same thing. A man named Liu Zhu is going to be the next emperor. He's the chosen one. We got to find this guy.
Okay, so they're looking for a messiah figure.
Yeah! And his buddies are all in. They're like, great! Who is he? Where is he? And Liu Xin, I swear to God, this is what happened. He just points at himself. He goes, it's me. I'm Liu Shu.
No, wait a second. His name is Liu Jin.
Thank you! Finally, someone with a brain in their head. Y-E-S. His name is Liu Jin. It's like my name is Bill, and I just decide, you know what? The prophecy says a guy named Captain America is going to save us all, so you can all call me Cap from now on. You don't just decide you're the Messiah. It's not a friggin' fantasy football team name you pick out on a Tuesday.
But that's insane. And the craziest part is, that was the one name the emperor was paranoid about, right? He was actively hunting anyone named Liu Zhu.
Does this guy have a death wish? That's what I'm asking. It's like walking into a biker bar wearing the rival gang's jacket and ordering a Chardonnay. So what does he do? He goes to the emperor, the one guy with an army of assassins looking for him, and he gives him this pitch. He's like, Your Majesty, look at it this way. The heavens did send a chosen one named Liu Zhu, but I'm him, and I work for you. See? This doesn't mean you're doomed. It means you are so unbelievably awesome, you've basically domesticated the hand of God. You put destiny itself on your payroll. You want to fight heaven? Or do you want to manage it like a slightly problematic middle-level employee?
And the emperor?
Just he buys it. The guy buys it. He signs off on it. Can you see the paperwork? Reason for name change, to domesticate the cosmos. Stamped, approved. The whole damn empire's being run by a guy who thinks he's playing 4D chess with God. And another guy who just fell for the oldest trick in the book. Just trust me, bro. Of course the coup failed. They were probably all standing around arguing about what font to use on the new business cards. It's unbelievable.
One month later, in September of 23 AD, the Green Forest Army stormed the capital, Chang'an. The city that had witnessed the glory of the Han for 2 centuries was engulfed in flames. And Wang Mang, the man some called a Socialist Emperor, remained a theorist to his very last breath. As the palace burned around him, he was led to a high terrace. He wore a purple robe, symbolizing his connection to the heavens, and clutched a dagger said to have belonged to a mythical sage king. Here he conducted his final ceremony. He did not organize a last stand. He did not rally his troops for street-to-street fighting. Before him, an astrologer manipulated a divining board, while Wang Mang himself slowly rotated his seat to align with the Big Dipper, trying one last time to connect with the cosmic forces he so deeply believed in. Then, he looked to the sky and let out a final hysterical roar. If heaven has granted me its virtue, what can these Han soldiers do to me? Beside him stood his last, terrified loyalists. One of them was an old, white-haired man, armored and holding a sword he no longer had the strength to wield. All he could do was look up at the sky and wail, "Oh, heaven! Heaven!" The histories record his name, and only his name. Kong Ren. Kong, the surname of Confucius. Ren, the word for benevolence. Confucian benevolence, weeping at the apocalypse. Then the rebel soldiers stormed the terrace. Filled with righteous fury, they cut down the emperor who lived in a world of theory and shattered his broken utopia into 1,000 pieces. So what was the final cost of this ideal state? According to the Book of Han, in the year 2 AD, near the end of the Han Dynasty, the population of China was approximately 59.6 million people in 12.4 million households. By 57 AD, after Wang Mang's 15-year reign and the subsequent wars, after the Eastern Han Dynasty had been established for 32 years, the population was just 21 million people in 4.3 million households. In the span of a single generation, some 40 million people had vanished from the land.
A utopia that promised to save the people ended up consuming them. It's impossible not to think of another ambitious emperor, the great Emperor Wu of Han. Late in his reign, his endless wars had also exhausted the empire, cutting the population in half. But the difference is, Emperor Wu woke up. He issued the first ever Edict of Repentance in Chinese history, publicly admitting his mistakes and shifting the national focus from expansion to recovery. And the Han Dynasty he left behind was fortunate enough to find its restorer just 13 years later. The very man the prophecies had foretold.
Back then, a young woman named Wang Zhengjun first entered the crown prince's palace. Her black hair was piled high like clouds, her skin was powdered white, her cheeks flushed with the color of dawn, her eyebrows were painted long and thin, and her lips were touched with the deep crimson of a cherry. A small red flower dimple was painted by the corner of her smiling mouth. More than 60 years later, she would die in lonely sorrow, dressed in black sable robes to mourn the Han Dynasty she had helped to destroy. 10 years after that, her palace and the entire city of Chang'an would be burned to the ground. Because when she married the prince, the emperor who ruled the world was born a commoner and cared about the people. But the nephew she trusted in her old age was born to privilege and cared only for power, cloaking his ambition in a costume of virtue. The people to him were merely an audience for his performance. He only ever believed in one thing: the mandate of heaven. Right up until the moment a blade, wielded by one of the people, came for his head.
1,300 years later, a scholar official named Zhang Yanghao was traveling through the ruins of that same capital on his way to manage a famine relief effort. He would die of exhaustion at that post, passing through the Tong Pass, a place that had witnessed the rise and fall of countless dynasties. He wrote a famous poem. I'd like to share its conclusion with you.
山坡羊，潼关怀古，风暖如炬，波涛如鹿。山河表里潼关路，望西都忆踌躇。伤心秦汉今行处，宫阙万间都做了图。新百姓苦，亡百姓苦。